If the beast does not silence her, the secret inside its collar will. Grace Miller heard Counselor Victor Mercer whisper those words as the iron gate closed above her, sealing her inside the deepest pit beneath Blackwood Castle. Only hours earlier, she had been caring for 3 royal wolf pups in the palace infirmary. Then the pups suddenly became ill, a rare vial of medicine disappeared, and Victor presented records bearing Grace's name. With King Ethan Blackwood still returning from the northern border, Victor pressured the royal council into declaring her guilty before she could examine the evidence. Grace had expected imprisonment and a formal hearing. She had not expected to be lowered 20 feet underground into the enclosure of Ghost, the enormous white wolf every servant called the king's worst beast. The guards claimed Ghost had frightened away every handler who approached him. Victor assured the council that placing Grace in the pit would reveal the truth. If she survived until dawn, the king could question her himself. No one believed she would. Grace pressed one hand against the silver pendant her mother had left her and forced herself to breathe steadily. The pit was cold and wide, with damp stone walls rising toward a narrow circle of moonlight. Somewhere beyond the darkness, claws moved across rock. Grace stepped backward until her shoulders touched the wall. She remembered the 3 pups lying weakly beneath clean blankets and knew their illness had not been natural. Their food had carried the faint scent of bitterroot. Yet her warning had been dismissed moments before Victor's guards searched her cabinet and found the missing medicine. Someone had arranged every detail carefully, including her silence. A low sound rolled through the pit. 2 amber eyes appeared in the shadows, nearly level with Grace's chest. Ghost emerged slowly, his white coat catching the moonlight until he resembled something shaped from winter itself. He was larger than any wolf Grace had treated, but his posture did not match the stories. His head remained lowered, and one side of his body moved stiffly. Grace noticed an iron collar buried beneath the thick fur around his neck. A dark stain marked the metal, and several small capsules had been fastened beneath its inner rim. Whatever they contained, they did not belong there. Ghost came within 6 feet of her and stopped. Grace did not run. She softened her voice as she would with a frightened animal in the infirmary. "I know what it feels like when everyone has already decided what you are." The wolf's ears lifted. Then his gaze shifted from her face to the silver pendant resting against her chest. Grace opened her hand, allowing the pendant to catch the moonlight. Ghost stared at its engraved crest, the same unfamiliar crest her mother had forbidden her to discuss. Instead of threatening her, the king's feared beast crossed the remaining distance and gently pressed his nose against the pendant. A quiet metallic click came from beneath his collar. Something small loosened inside it, and Victor's warning suddenly made sense. Grace had not been thrown into the pit because anyone believed Ghost would condemn her. She had been placed there because the beast was carrying evidence someone desperately needed to keep hidden. Grace kept her hand still as Ghost studied the silver pendant. The enormous wolf's breath warmed her fingers, but nothing in his posture suggested anger. He appeared cautious, almost hopeful, as though he had been waiting years to see the engraved crest again. When Grace slowly turned the pendant over, Ghost lowered himself onto the stone floor and revealed the iron collar beneath his thick white fur. The metallic clicking continued at irregular intervals. Grace recognized the sound of a loose compartment, but she also noticed the way Ghost leaned away whenever the collar shifted against the irritated skin around his neck. "You are not guarding the secret," she whispered. "You are trapped with it." Ghost watched her carefully as she moved closer. She tore a clean strip from the inner lining of her sleeve, dampened it with water from the small flask the guards had left, and held it where he could smell it. After a moment, he rested his head against the ground. Grace gently separated the fur around the collar. The skin beneath it was inflamed, and faint traces of blue powder clung to the metal. The scent reminded her of the bitterroot she had detected in the wolf pup's food, but this mixture contained something sweeter that she could not yet identify. She cleaned the area without attempting to remove the collar. Its unusual lock required a specially fitted key, and forcing it could cause Ghost more pain. The wolf remained calm beneath her touch. No trained handler would have called that obedience. It was trust freely given. When Grace finished, Ghost rose and walked toward a narrow opening at the base of the wall. He pushed one paw into the shadows and drew out a thin piece of tarnished silver. Then he carried it back and placed it beside her pendant. Grace's breath caught. The metal fragment bore the same crest, a crescent moon crossed by 3 narrow lines. Her mother had once told her the symbol belonged to healers who protected the royal wolves before the present infirmary existed, but she had refused to explain more. Grace aligned the broken fragment with the edge of her pendant. They fit together perfectly. A memory surfaced from childhood. Her mother had often returned home smelling of cedar, winter herbs, and clean animal fur. She had claimed to work in a village clinic, yet Grace now wondered whether she had once served inside Blackwood Castle. Ghost touched the joined pieces with his nose, then turned his head sharply toward the gate overhead. Footsteps crossed the platform, followed by Victor Mercer's voice. He ordered the guards to inspect the pit before sunrise, but warned them not to descend. Grace quickly hid the metal fragment inside her sleeve. Victor was not checking whether she had survived. He was checking whether she had discovered something. After the footsteps faded, Ghost returned to her side and lowered his neck again. Grace examined the collar more closely. Beneath its inner rim, she discovered 3 narrow capsules held inside silver brackets. One was empty. Another contained blue powder. The third held a tightly rolled strip of paper. Before she could reach it, the hidden mechanism clicked, and a tiny needle inside the clasp began sliding toward the paper. Grace understood that the collar had been designed to destroy its own secret. She pressed the silver fragment into the moving gear, stopping it less than an inch from the document. Ghost remained perfectly still as she carefully opened the compartment and removed the paper. The crescent crest marked its outer edge. Grace unfolded it and recognized her father's handwriting from the notes he had left before disappearing 12 years earlier. The faded message contained 7 words that changed everything. Tell Grace Miller her father is alive. Grace read the 7 words again, certain the darkness had deceived her. Her father, Samuel Miller, had been declared dead 12 years earlier after disappearing during a winter journey to a remote village. No body had ever been recovered, but his damaged carriage and medical bag had been found beside an abandoned road. Grace had been 7 years old when officials delivered the news. Her mother had accepted the report without question, yet she had hidden the crescent pendant shortly afterward and warned Grace never to reveal it inside Blackwood Castle. Now a message written in Samuel's familiar handwriting and carried inside the royal wolf's collar claimed that he was alive. Grace examined the faded ink beneath the moonlight. Beside the final word, Samuel had drawn the same 3-line symbol he once placed on every medical record. Ghost nudged the blue capsule with his nose, then walked toward the narrow opening in the wall. Grace secured the message and silver fragment inside her sleeve before following him. The opening led into a shallow passage barely 4 feet high. Ghost moved slowly enough for her to remain beside him. After nearly 30 feet, they entered a hidden stone chamber beneath the pit. Old shelves lined one wall, and broken glass containers rested beneath years of dust. This had not always been an animal enclosure. It had once been a treatment room. Grace found faded labels naming cedarroot, winter mint, and silverleaf, the same remedies her father had taught her to prepare as a child. Lines had been carved into the far wall. Most recorded dates and dosages, but one sentence stopped her. Samuel Miller refused the final order. Beneath, it was a list of wolves identified only by symbols. The final symbol matched the crescent crest associated with Ghost. Grace carefully removed the capsule containing blue powder from the collar. She placed a single grain in a shallow stone dish, added 2 drops of water, and mixed in dried silverleaf from the shelf. The liquid turned pale green. Her father had shown her that reaction years earlier. The powder was not poison. It was a powerful calming compound that caused confusion when administered repeatedly. Someone had been using the collar to release small doses, making Ghost appear unpredictable while keeping him too disoriented to guide anyone to this chamber. Grace opened the empty capsule and detected the same bitterroot scent she had noticed in the pup's food. The illnesses were connected. The 3 pups had likely discovered something inside the infirmary, and whoever controlled Ghost needed them removed before they could lead Ethan to the truth. A distant bell sounded above them, announcing that dawn was less than an hour away. Grace searched the shelves and found a weathered leather journal concealed behind a loose stone. Its cover identified it as the first volume of Samuel Miller's medical records. Several pages had been removed, but the remaining entries described unauthorized experiments involving the royal wolves and evidence hidden beneath the oldest enclosure. Samuel had planned to present his findings directly to the former king, but someone inside the council had discovered his investigation. His final entry ended with an unfinished warning. If I do not return, trust the White Guardian and find the chamber beneath the royal bedchamber. Grace's heart raced. Ethan had been only a boy when Samuel disappeared, confirming that the hidden chamber and the conspiracy both predated his reign. Ghost suddenly turned toward the passage, his ears raised. Voices echoed from the pit as Victor ordered the gate opened. Grace returned the first journal to its hiding place, concealed one torn page inside her sleeve, and hurried back with Ghost. As the first gray light reached the stone floor, the wolf settled beside her and wrapped his warm body around her shoulders. Grace understood what he wanted. Victor could not know they had discovered the chamber. She rested against Ghost's fur and closed her eyes just as footsteps descended into the pit. The man approaching was not Victor. King Ethan Blackwood had returned. King Ethan Blackwood descended the stone steps with 2 guards several paces behind him, but he raised one hand and ordered them to remain near the gate. He had ridden through the night after receiving an urgent message that the 3 royal wolf pups were ill. No one had told him that Grace Miller had already been judged or that Victor Mercer had sent her into the pit without royal approval. Ethan had learned of the sentence only after entering the castle courtyard, and the news had brought him directly below the palace before he had even removed his travel coat. He expected to find panic, confusion, or evidence that Ghost had become the dangerous creature the council described. Instead, the first light of dawn revealed Grace sleeping safely against the enormous wolf's white fur. Ghost had curved his body around her to protect her from the cold, and his head rested near her shoulder. Ethan stopped halfway down the final step. For 6 years, Ghost had refused every appointed handler and avoided nearly everyone except Ethan. Yet the wolf now guarded a woman he had met only hours earlier. Victor appeared above the pit and urged Ethan not to approach, claiming Grace had used stolen medicine to control the animal. Ethan ignored him and quietly called Ghost by name. The wolf opened his amber eyes but did not leave Grace. He simply lifted his head and watched Ethan with calm recognition. Grace awakened at the sound of Ethan's voice. For one startled moment, her hand moved toward the torn page hidden inside her sleeve. Then she saw the royal crest on his coat and understood who stood before her. She rose slowly, careful not to disturb Ghost, while Ethan studied the iron collar and the clean strip of cloth placed beneath it. "Did he harm you?" Ethan asked. "No, Your Majesty," Grace answered. "Someone has been harming him." Victor immediately declared that she was trying to shift blame, but Ethan turned toward the platform and asked who had authorized the sentence. No one replied. The silence confirmed that the council had acted under Victor's pressure while Ethan was away. Grace looked directly at the king. "Ghost is not the beast you need to fear." Her words caused the guards to exchange uneasy glances, but Ethan did not dismiss them. He stepped closer and noticed blue powder along the collar's inner rim. He had seen the same color once before, years earlier, in an old medical room that had been sealed after a royal healer disappeared. When Ethan reached toward the collar, Ghost moved between him and Grace, not with hostility, but with unmistakable purpose. Grace placed her palm against the wolf's shoulder and spoke softly. Ghost relaxed at once, allowing Ethan to inspect the metal. A crescent symbol had been scratched beside the clasp, almost hidden beneath the fur. Ethan recognized it immediately. Samuel Miller had worn that symbol when he served as the royal wolf's most trusted healer. Victor descended one step and insisted that Samuel had betrayed the crown 12 years earlier. Grace felt the torn journal page against her wrist, but kept it concealed. She needed to know whether Ethan was part of the secret before revealing what she had found. Ethan ordered the gate opened and declared Grace's sentence suspended pending a complete investigation. As the guards lowered a wide wooden ramp, Ghost refused to move until Grace stepped onto it first. Ethan watched them climb out together, then noticed a faded line of ink on Grace's sleeve. It formed 3 words from Samuel's unfinished warning, beneath Ethan's room. Ethan said nothing about the ink on Grace's sleeve until they had crossed the courtyard and entered the secure treatment chamber beside the royal infirmary. Ghost followed Grace closely, while two healers carried the three sick wolf pups into clean beds near the windows. Their breathing had steadied during the night, but they remained weak. Grace examined their food bowls and confirmed that the bitterroot scent matched the residue from Ghost's empty capsule. Ethan immediately sealed the infirmary records and ordered every remaining medicine vial preserved. Victor objected, insisting that Grace should be confined, but Ethan reminded him that no lawful verdict could be issued in the king's absence. He then summoned the council and gave Grace 1 hour to demonstrate what she had discovered. Before the hearing began, Ethan quietly asked why Samuel Miller's warning had appeared on her sleeve. Grace realized concealment would only deepen his suspicion. She showed him the torn journal page, the rolled message, and the silver fragment that matched her pendant, but she did not reveal the location of the underground treatment room. "My father wrote that there is a chamber beneath your room," she said. "I need to know whether you already knew." Ethan's expression tightened. He explained that his private rooms had belonged to his father 12 years earlier. After Samuel disappeared, several passages beneath that wing had been sealed by order of the former regent. That regent had been Victor's uncle. Ethan promised Grace that she would enter the chamber with him, but first they needed to expose the evidence hidden in Ghost's collar before Victor could dismiss it as another accusation. In the council hall, Victor repeated that Ghost was uncontrollable and that Grace had used forbidden medicine to influence him. Ethan answered by inviting every council member to observe from a safe distance. Grace knelt beside Ghost and spoke to him in the same calm voice she had used in the pit. She showed him the special key taken from the infirmary cabinet, then slowly opened the iron clasp. Ghost remained perfectly still. When the heavy collar came free, he pressed his head against Grace's shoulder before walking to the three pups. The feared beast lowered himself beside their beds, and the smallest pup rested its chin upon his paw. The room fell silent. Grace placed the collar on the council table and revealed the concealed compartments, the blue compound, and the mechanism designed to destroy the hidden paper. Ethan then unrolled the document found inside. It ordered the transfer of medicinal supplies from the Royal Infirmary to an unnamed storage room and carried Ethan's official seal. Victor claimed the order proved the king had authorized the transfer. Ethan studied the signature and declared that he had never written it. The seal was convincing, but the date came from a week when Ethan had been 300 miles away negotiating a northern treaty. Grace examined the ink and detected the same sweet herbal scent mixed with the blue powder. Whoever forged the order had prepared both substances in the same place. Ethan turned the document toward the council clerk, who compared its lettering with the castle archives. The signature was false, but the body of the order matched the handwriting of Daniel Blackwood, Ethan's cousin and most trusted advisor. Daniel stepped forward in disbelief. He swore that he had never seen the document, yet Victor demanded his immediate arrest. Before Ethan could respond, Ghost rose from beside the pups, crossed the hall, and stopped in front of Daniel. He sniffed Daniel's hand, then turned away without concern. A moment later, the wolf approached Ethan's travel coat and pulled a small blue-stained cloth from its inner pocket. Victor pointed triumphantly at the evidence, but Grace recognized what no one else did. The stain was still damp. Someone had planted it after Ethan returned to the castle. Grace lifted the blue-stained cloth with silver tongs and asked the council clerk when Ethan's travel coat had been brought into the hall. A young attendant explained that Victor's secretary had collected it from the courtyard less than 30 minutes earlier. Victor dismissed the detail as meaningless, but Grace placed 1 drop of water on the stain. The blue color spread across the cloth while a sweet scent rose from it, identical to the compound hidden inside Ghost's collar. "This mixture was prepared recently," Grace said. "If it had traveled 300 miles with the king, the stain would be dry and nearly odorless." Ethan ordered the doors closed and instructed his guards to find Victor's secretary, but the man had already disappeared. Victor immediately redirected the council's suspicion toward Daniel, arguing that only Ethan's trusted cousin possessed access to the royal seal, private wardrobe, and infirmary records. Daniel admitted that the handwriting resembled his own, yet he insisted that he had never written the transfer order. Grace asked him to provide a fresh sample. As Daniel copied the first sentence, she noticed that he formed the letter M with 3 sharp strokes, just as it appeared on the forged document. The similarity troubled her until she examined older council records. Daniel had changed his handwriting after injuring his right wrist 2 years earlier. The forged order used his former style, proving that the writer had copied documents preserved in the archives rather than anything Daniel had written recently. Ethan refused Victor's demand for an arrest and suspended the hearing until noon. He instructed Daniel to remain under guard for his own protection, then asked Grace to help search the chamber mentioned in the first volume of Samuel Miller's journal. Ghost followed them through the private wing and stopped outside the royal bedchamber, which had belonged to Ethan's father 12 years earlier. Morning light filled the spacious room lined with maps, books, and locked cabinets. Ethan explained that Victor had supervised its renovation after the former king's death. Grace searched the floor while Ethan examined the walls for concealed doors. Their investigation remained cautious, but the distance between them had changed. Ethan apologized for allowing a council system in which Grace could be condemned before he heard her defense. Grace answered that an apology mattered only if he changed the system that had made her sentence possible. Rather than taking offense, Ethan promised that he would. Ghost circled the room twice before pressing his nose against a cedar wardrobe. Inside hung the dark cloak Ethan had worn during his final winter council meeting before the renovation. Blue powder coated its lower hem. Ethan stared at it in silence, aware that a second discovery among his clothing could make him appear responsible. Grace transferred a small amount of the residue onto a clean cloth and immediately noticed a difference. This powder was old, dry, and mixed with silver-marking dust, a substance used to identify anyone who handled sealed royal documents. Ghost sniffed the cloak, but showed no interest in the aged residue. Instead, he crossed to the fireplace and scratched gently at a stone near the hearth. Grace discovered a crescent-shaped indentation matching the silver fragment Ghost had recovered from the pit. When Ethan pressed the fragment into it, part of the wall opened inward, revealing a hidden staircase beneath the royal bedchamber. At the bottom, they found a locked chamber containing empty medicine crates and practice sheets covered with copied samples of Daniel's former handwriting. Before they could examine the room further, footsteps sounded above. Victor entered the royal bedchamber with several council members and announced that new evidence proved Ethan had ordered the experiments himself. Ethan moved toward the staircase, but Grace stopped him. If they emerged carrying evidence from a secret chamber beneath his own room, Victor would claim they had manufactured it. Ghost suddenly lifted his head and stared into a second passage leading away from the chamber. A faint light approached through the darkness, followed by the careful footsteps of a man carrying a worn journal against his chest. "Grace," the unseen man whispered. "If the council finds me here with Ethan before I can prove who framed him, Victor will remove him from the throne." Grace recognized the voice from a childhood she had believed lost forever. Her father was alive. Grace stepped toward the dark passage, but Ethan remained beside her, listening as the hidden man approached. Samuel Miller emerged into the faint light, carrying an old medical journal against his chest. His hair had turned silver, and 12 years of isolation had changed his face. Yet Grace recognized the gentle eyes she remembered from childhood. Samuel stopped several feet away, afraid that moving closer might endanger her. He explained that Victor had discovered his investigation years earlier and threatened Grace and her mother if he revealed the stolen supplies. Samuel had escaped into the forgotten passages beneath the castle, where loyal attendants secretly brought him food while he gathered evidence. He had placed the message inside Ghost's collar, hoping the White Wolf would eventually lead someone trustworthy to the truth. Ethan asked why Samuel believed his discovery could cost the king his throne. Before Samuel could answer, Victor's voice echoed from the room above. He told the council members that Ethan had been found inside a secret chamber filled with medicine crates, forged documents, and experimental compounds. Victor claimed the king had used Grace to remove Ghost's collar before the evidence could expose him. Samuel quickly opened his journal and showed Ethan a page bearing the former king's private seal. It proved that Victor's uncle had begun the illegal operation years before Ethan inherited the crown, but another missing ledger was needed to connect Victor directly to the current thefts. That ledger was hidden inside the council archive. Ethan understood that confronting Victor without it would allow him to dismiss Samuel as a frightened fugitive and Grace as an accused accomplice. Ethan opened the hidden wall and entered his room with Grace and Ghost while Samuel remained below. Victor immediately demanded that the council suspend Ethan's authority until an independent hearing could determine whether he had endangered the royal wolves. Several council members hesitated, but the evidence planted in Ethan's clothing had already weakened their confidence. Ethan could have ordered Victor removed. Instead, he announced that he would temporarily surrender administrative authority to prevent unrest, provided that Daniel remained under protection and Grace received unrestricted access to the infirmary records. Victor agreed too quickly. Grace realized he believed the final evidence had already been destroyed. As guards escorted Ethan to a private chamber, he quietly told Grace to trust Ghost's memory rather than any document. Grace returned to the infirmary and compared the fresh stain from Ethan's coat with the older powder on his winter cloak. The recent mixture contained cedar oil, while the older powder contained winter mint. Ghost ignored the winter cloak, but repeatedly followed the scent from the fresh cloth toward the council wing. Grace then learned that Victor's secretary had visited Ethan's room shortly before the hearing, carrying a document case from the archive. She followed Ghost through a service corridor until he stopped beside a locked cabinet outside Victor's temporary office. Daniel, still guarded nearby, provided an archive key and explained that the cabinet held discarded drafts awaiting destruction. Inside, Grace found no ledger, but she discovered a sheet of marking paper coated with the same silver dust found on Ethan's cloak. Someone had pressed a document against it recently, leaving a clear reversed impression. Grace held the paper near a lamp and read a list of medicine shipments transferred under Victor's personal authorization. At the bottom was a notation identifying the ledger's new hiding place, the abandoned Northern Watch Station. Before Grace could take the evidence to Ethan, the castle bell summoned everyone to an emergency hearing. Victor stood before the council and announced that a witness had confessed Ethan personally ordered the experiments. The doors opened, and Victor's missing secretary entered beside the guards. Ghost stared at the man, then calmly turned toward Victor. Grace finally understood the trap. The secretary had not returned to accuse Ethan. He had returned because Victor needed someone else to blame before Ghost led Grace to the ledger. Victor's secretary stood before the council and claimed that Ethan had personally ordered him to place the blue compound inside Ghost's collar. The testimony sent a wave of uncertainty through the chamber, but Grace noticed that the man never looked toward Ethan. His eyes remained fixed on Victor, as though waiting for approval after every sentence. Victor demanded an immediate vote to remove Ethan from the throne. Before the clerk could begin, Grace entered with Ghost and placed the silver-marked impression from the archive cabinet on the council table. She explained that it recorded medicine shipments authorized by Victor and identified the abandoned Northern Watch Station as the location of the missing ledger. Victor called the impression meaningless because it contained no signature, but Ethan revealed that Daniel had already sent 2 trusted royal investigators to the station through a secure passage beneath the castle. Their return bell sounded moments later. The doors opened, and the investigators carried in a sealed ledger, several unopened medicine crates, and a document case belonging to Victor's secretary. Every shipment listed in the ledger matched the quantities missing from the infirmary. More importantly, each transfer carried Victor's personal authorization mark. Victor argued that Ethan had manufactured the evidence to protect himself, so Grace asked the council to observe Ghost without speaking or moving. She presented the cloth planted in Ethan's coat, the blue capsule from Ghost's collar, and the secretary's document case. Ghost calmly examined each object before approaching the secretary. The wolf sniffed his sleeve, then moved past him and stopped directly in front of Victor. He lowered his head toward Victor's right hand, where faint blue powder remained beneath a signet ring. Victor quickly hid his hand, but Grace asked him to remove the ring. Inside its hollow setting was a trace of cedar oil mixed with the same calming compound used on Ghost. A young infirmary attendant then stepped forward. He admitted that Victor had ordered him to replace Ghost's collar 3 months earlier, claiming the old one required repair. The boy had remained silent because Victor threatened to dismiss his mother from the castle kitchens. Ethan assured him that telling the truth would not cost either of them their position. Samuel emerged from the council passage carrying his medical journal, and the room fell silent. He identified the blue compound as a treatment he had developed 12 years earlier for frightened animals, never intended for repeated use. Victor had stolen the formula, altered its concentration, and used it to make Ghost appear unstable. Samuel also produced the former king's sealed order closing the illegal operation, proving Ethan had never authorized it. Faced with the ledger, the ring, and Samuel's testimony, Victor accused his secretary of acting alone. The secretary's composure finally broke. He admitted that Victor had instructed him to plant the stained cloth in Ethan's coat and promise false testimony in exchange for safe passage out of the kingdom. Ethan ordered the guards to open Victor's private archive while the entire council watched. Behind a concealed panel, they discovered the remaining medicine, the missing antidote, copied royal seals, and records showing years of stolen funds. Grace immediately carried the antidote to the infirmary, where the three pups received the proper treatment and began responding within minutes. When she returned, Ghost stood beside Ethan while Victor was escorted from the chamber for a public trial. The council prepared to restore Ethan's authority, but Samuel opened the final page of the ledger and revealed one last order. It bore Victor's mark and Grace's name, yet it had been written 12 years earlier, on the very night her father disappeared. Samuel placed the final order beneath the council lamps and explained that Victor had written Grace's name beside a command to relocate Samuel's family beyond the kingdom before his investigation reached the former king. Grace had not been marked as part of the experiment. She had been marked as leverage. Victor had threatened to separate Samuel from his wife and 7-year-old daughter unless he surrendered his journal and disappeared. Samuel had entered the hidden passages to protect them, believing the danger would end once Victor assumed he was dead. Instead, Victor watched Grace for years, arranged her employment in the royal infirmary, and waited to see whether Samuel had entrusted her with evidence. The missing medicine, the sick pups, and Grace's false sentence had all been designed to draw Samuel out while destroying the final records inside Ghost's collar. Victor's whispered warning in the pit now revealed his complete intent. He had never expected Grace to survive long enough to understand it. Ethan ordered every document copied in the presence of neutral clerks and delivered to the royal court. Victor would receive a lawful public trial, not the secret judgment he had imposed on Grace. His secretary and the frightened infirmary attendant were placed under protection in exchange for truthful testimony. Daniel was formally cleared when the archive records confirmed that his former handwriting had been copied, and Ethan's authority was restored by unanimous vote. Before the council adjourned, Ethan refused to continue as though the system had merely suffered one dishonest official. He abolished punishment without a hearing, required independent review of evidence, and prohibited any council member from controlling both an investigation and its verdict. Grace's conviction was erased from every record, and Ethan appointed her to lead a new royal animal care program with authority independent of the council. In the infirmary, the three pups recovered steadily under Grace and Samuel's care. Ghost remained beside their beds until the smallest pup stood, crossed the blanket, and curled against his white paw. Without the iron collar and repeated compound, Ghost's confusion faded. He walked freely through the castle gardens, no longer treated as a creature to be feared. Samuel returned to daylight slowly, and Grace did not pretend 12 lost years could be repaired in a single reunion. They began with honest conversations, shared meals, and the journals he had kept for her birthday each year. Weeks later, Grace stood in the restored treatment room beneath the old enclosure as workers transformed it into an archive honoring the healers who had protected the royal wolves. Ethan joined her carrying the crescent pendant, now repaired with its missing silver fragment. He fastened the two pieces together and returned it to her open palm. "Your family protected this kingdom when mine failed to protect yours," he said. "I cannot change what happened, but I can make certain the truth changes what happens next." Grace answered that promises mattered only when they survived beyond the moment that inspired them. Ethan smiled and showed her the signed reforms already posted throughout the castle. Then he asked whether he might walk with her in the gardens, not as a king rewarding a subject, but as a man hoping to know the woman who had taught him that authority without compassion was only another kind of cage. Grace accepted, though she warned him that Ghost would decide their pace. Outside, the three pups hurried across the sunlit grass while Ghost waited beside the open garden gate. When Grace and Ethan approached together, the great white wolf looked from one to the other, then stepped forward into the morning. This time, there was no iron collar around his neck, no hidden order controlling their future, and no gate closing behind them.